What's happening? Welcome in Monday Live. My name's Jason Priester, Clemson Insider. Appreciate everybody that is tuning in. Looks like I'm having a Facebook issue over there on the TCI Facebook page. If I don't know, there's some glitch in that thing, man, where it doesn't show up from time to time. I don't know why. I hadn't been able to figure it out, but here we are nonetheless. Before we get started, I want to thank our sponsors over at A-Glass, 2 locations right here in the PD, one in Florence, one in Sumter. They'll take care of all your auto glass needs. They do replacement. They do repair. You can get yourself a free quote, myaglass.com. Kind of all quiet on the Clemson front, huh? All these changes we've been expecting to see, once the regular season ended, or once the season ended. Haven't really seen any yet outside of, John Gross taking the head coaching job there at Samford and taking a couple of support staffers with him. Or not, I should say a small number. It's more than a couple. Guys like Paul Tyson and Drew Sweeney and Andrew Zhao, Brandon Thompson. So he's taking a handful with him. There was a lot of chatter that he would take Mickey Khan with him to be his defensive coordinator. That actually looks like it's not going to happen. So that's something else to keep an eye on, because I don't think Khan's going to be back next year regardless. Just don't think he's going to end up at Samford with Gross. Interesting that they have chosen to kind of go through the bowl game before, really addressing any of this stuff. If you've kind of, and it's a little bit different when you're talking about coordinators as opposed to position coaches, because, with some of these position coaches, they can probably find gigs in the NFL. You could, with these coordinators is a little, or with Clemson's coordinators, is a little bit different. If you've kind of paid attention to how Dabo Swinney's going about it in the past, he usually doesn't make a move until he knows what the replacement's going to be. Still lean towards thinking there's going to be a change there. I think it would be disastrous at this point if, for whatever reason, you kind of changed course and decided to bring Garrett Riley back. You'd basically be bringing what would be perceived as a guy who is going to be a lame duck coordinator, even though he's got 2 years left on his deal. His buyout's like 3.5. Heck, I was thinking he was only have 1 year left on his deal, but it's actually 2. So his buyout's 3.5. But yeah, if you kind of pay attention to how Dabo's done it in the past, he absolutely usually doesn't make a move until he knows who he's going to replace him with. But back to what I was saying, if you decide for whatever reason, if you change course and decide you're going to bring Riley back another year, man, I just don't know how well that's going to work. I don't, it seems like it's as many times as we saw Dabo call him out in the press this year, something you really don't see Dabo ever do. You have to wonder if there's maybe a strain in that relationship. You have to wonder if Dabo even fully trusts him to run the offense anymore. At the same time, maybe they go through everything and decide it's been more quarterback play than it has been play calling, although I'm of the opinion it's been a little bit of both, or a lot of bit of both. So still some interesting dynamics to be worked out on this team once they get back from New York. They headed out today. They're already up there. They'll spend the week up there ahead of the game on Saturday. The game is kind of taken to a back seat, to fans getting impatient with portal stuff and coaching changes stuff. You should have known Clemson. You're not going to hear anything about the portal with Clemson until after it opens. Doesn't mean you can't be, getting a head start on it and doing your due diligence. But, it doesn't open until January 2nd. There's not a whole lot you can do. You can't sign anybody before then or anything like that. And I still think that it's possible we could see a couple more portal departures after the bowl game. There's one thing to keep in mind. If you opt out or you announce you're transferring and you leave the team right at the end of the regular season, you're not getting paid that last check. That you're not getting that December check. A lot of times agents, if they know their guy's going to enter the portal, they don't want him going through bowl practice and playing in a bowl game that could, end up costing his guy an injury and costing him a lot of money once the portal does open. Sometimes those guys need that last check and they have to stay. So I don't know that we're completely done with the portal departures either. There's definitely a handful of names that I had been heard bantered about that have not made any kind of announcements yet. So we'll see how that plays out. I think the bigger thing is, though, who you're going to add through the portal and what the coaching staff is going to look like next year. Because I think it's going to look different. I get it. People are growing impatient and they want to see those moves made right now. But you're going to have to wait another week at least. I do think waiting until after the bowl game, I don't think it absolutely destroys you. I mean, let's get that out the way right off the bat. But, it can hurt you with some portal guys. Say for whatever reason, say you're going to target a quarterback, right? That guy's going to want to know who his quarterback coach is, who his offensive coordinator is going to be. I mean, you can tell him what the scheme's going to be, the system and stuff, but, not everyone will be comfortable coming not knowing who the guy's going to be. I mean, you can do your best to try to work around that, but so that is definitely one of the downsides to holding off and waiting until after the bowl game with the portal opening 5 days later. Basketball team just barely, survives what looked like another epic collapse yesterday in Greenville, which gets my vote. I've been doing this for over 5 years now, and that had to be the worst put on event that I've attended yet. It was just it was a disaster from the credentialing all the way to the setup. I mean, they had, usually when you go to a basketball game and you got photographers, photographers are on the court. They're sitting on the baseline. They're not allowed to move around. They got one spot there on the baseline, and they stay there and they shoot from there all game long. They put all the photographers up in a suite in Bon Secours with the writers. You're not going to get great shots from up there, man. It made absolutely no sense. I got my credential approval yesterday morning about 4 hours before tip. Put it in on Tuesday. I mean, the whole thing was a disaster. That's a different topic for a different day. But you certainly, Clemson's had some issues in the second half here in the last couple of weeks, man, defensively in particular. They opened well against BYU, meltdown in the second half. Man, opened well against Cincinnati. A lot of that was Cincinnati playing like trash. I thought Cincinnati did a good job of making some adjustments at halftime. And one second. Trying to get Brandon on here tonight, and I see him there. I don't know if he's going to jump on or not. He will if he has time. I lost my train of thought there. Oh, basketball. Yeah, I thought Cincinnati did a really good job with some of the adjustments they made at halftime, and it really kind of threw Clemson off kilter. And I thought not having you're already without Zach Foster, which to me is a devastating blow. You didn't have Johnson in the second half yesterday, man. He's still kind of banged up after there's something going on with his groin that happened during the South Carolina game. And he wasn't really available in the second half. So you're down 2 bodies at guard. And I thought it hurt Clemson a little defensively depth-wise in the second half yesterday. But there's a couple of things that worry me about this team, man. I just don't know how well they hold up or they're gonna hold up. They've actually surprised me in some instances this year, um, but I don't know how well they're gonna hold up over the long haul, kind of physically down in the paint, particularly on days like yesterday, and even South Carolina. It didn't end up costing on the win, but RJ Godfrey's had a couple of games where his shots just aren't falling. He's getting looks and he's getting to the rim. The shots just aren't falling, and I fully expect they'll start falling again. But outside of him, man, there's not a lot of physicality down there. I mean, I don't see it a lot with Blake Davidson. Carter Willings kind of, yeah, it really is just RJ. He's probably the most physically, or the guy with the most, plays the most physical. Let's put it that way. So I'll be interested to see how they hold up in ACC play, man. I really thought Foster was starting to come along, man. The game looked like it was really finally starting to slow down for him a little bit. And these guards, man, they all do certain things well. Like let's say, for example, Dylan Hunter. Man, he can run the floor for you. He's really good at that. He's good on the defensive end. He's not a guy that's going to go off for 30 or hit 7, 8, 9 threes in a game or put the team on his back. He's going to make free throws late, when you need them, like he did yesterday. But I don't know that Clemson's got that kind of shooter, and I thought Foster could have potentially gotten there in the second half of the season. So devastating blow to them, man. Devastating blow to him too. Just kind of severely slows down his development. Because that guy, man, he looks like he's got all the tools. For your recruiting guys, the elite retreat's going to be on March 7th this year. 5-star linebacker Caden Henderson's already told me he's coming. 4-star wide receiver Jamar Simmons told me he's coming. 4-star offensive lineman Carter Jones just told me he's coming. To be honest, I see keeping the current coaching staff. I do not. I don't know how you can have the season you just had and decide to run it back status quo. It would. You're already hurting on the recruiting trail as is from a perception standpoint. That 7-5 season hurt with this 27 class, and Clemson kind of. If you look at the guest lists from one week to the next throughout the season. Once you got past that LSU game, particularly after they lost at Georgia Tech and fell to 1-3, there just weren't a lot of, highly touted, notable 2027 targets, that they kept bringing to campus, man. It was more 2028 guys and 2029 guys. They kind of basically, I like to say, they kind of hit the pause button on the 27 class, and it's hurt them with some guys. I know that for a fact. I don't see how you can, go 7-5 and sell to these kids. Hey, man, we got the right pieces in place. Number one, I don't think you have the right pieces in place anymore. I think there's probably some good football coaches on this staff that won't be back next year, and not because they're not good football coaches, more so because they don't either work well with the coordinator or their, styles don't match up or, something along those lines. But I absolutely 100% firmly believe there will be changes to the coaching staff, and I think there needs to be. Dabo needs to stop being afraid of hurting these guys' feeling like Zaire. He never played at Clemson just to waste a spot. Yeah, I'm a firmly disagree with that, man. I don't think you run off a guy just because he's been hurt. I can't get on board with that. There are other ways. People think that Clemson never Dabo's not going to come out, cut somebody and tell them you got to go. But there have been a lot of examples of where a guy's been nudged into the portal or, encouraged to leave because he's not going to, get the playing time he wants while he was at Clemson. There's other ways to trim fat from the roster, without outright cutting the guy. But you'll never get me on board with cutting the guy because he's hurt. And Zaire Patterson has been hurt almost his entire career. Sounds like Chandler Morris is getting another year. It would be criminal if Tristan Smith was denied. Yeah, I agree with that, man. He played a year at JUCO. I don't know how, if there is, he is the prime example of, what getting that JUCO year back should look like. He's only played 4 years. He didn't redshirt. He would have been a guy that could have benefited from that court ruling last week that the judge kicked down the road. But yeah, it'll be disappointing if he doesn't get it. That's for sure. And he wants it, and he wants to come back and play at Clemson next year. And I did see after the last home game, he had taken like his nameplate from his locker and those kind of things with him after that game, I guess preparing for the possibility of him not being back in that locker room next year. But Clemson could use him next year too. I mean, you're gonna lose Antonio. Who knows what the future holds for Bryant Wesco. I know all the talk's been positive and they're expecting him back, man, but there's no guarantee when you start talking about neck injuries. And he's a little bit different than the other guys on the roster. And I think he'll benefit, from having a second year. I think he'll be much better suited to help you, as opposed to where he was this year, kind of making that jump. And, I think it was a lot for him. Do you think Cade gets drafted by an NFL team? Can a good bowl performance help his stat? I think somebody will take a shot on him, but I think it'll be late. At the very least, he'll get signed as an undrafted free agent, but I think he'll get taken. I don't think it'll come to that. And that's, I think Cade would have played in the bowl game no matter what. I just think it's who he is. It's in his DNA. You can kind of tell if he's got the opportunity to play, he's going to go play. He's just one of those guys that lives for it. But he did also talk about this game, potentially being able to maybe help him a little bit in that regard. So, I mean, I don't think it'll help him a lot, but it certainly can't hurt. A good performance can't hurt anyway. Let's say it that way. You go out there and have a disaster, obviously, that can – you don't want to do that, but if you go out there and play well, it certainly won't hurt. Are you surprised we haven't seen more movement on the staff than the little bit that we have going to Samford? Did you always anticipate little change until you know what? I actually originally thought we'd start seeing some before the bowl game just because the portal opens up so quickly after the game. But again, if I had really thought it out, and really put some deep thought into it, I probably would have realized it's probably not going to happen after the bowl game. That's just kind of been Dabo's MO a lot of the time. Not always, but most of the time, again, especially if you're talking about a coordinator. I don't think he's going to make the move just to make the move. I think he's got to have, somebody he likes, somebody he believes in place, before he goes out and makes that move. I don't think you want to fire the guy not knowing who you're going to have replace him. And I also believe they don't want to fire him anyways. Again, that buyout's $3.5 million. You wanted to give him every opportunity to find another gig. And from my understanding, he would have taken less money to go be the head coach at Coastal, less than what he's making at Clemson right now. But so I can't say I'm outright shocked, but originally I did think they'd probably, we at least hear some before the bowl game. But there's also some of those guys on the, especially on the defensive staff, that could, if they're not back next year, they could, hook up with NFL jobs. You got a couple of guys on that side of the ball that have coached in the NFL before. I'm not saying I don't expect those guys back. I'm just using them as examples. And if those are guys you're thinking about making a change with, you don't necessarily have to run them off right now. Which Terrell brother had a better Clemson career? AJ. Avion, I think Avion can be a fine corner in the NFL, man, but AJ's I think he's a different kind of cat. That's just me. He's got a little bit more, he's probably a little bit longer, got a little bit more length, probably just a little bit stronger with his cover skills. But I think both of them, I think Avion's going to end up having a pretty solid NFL career too. He'll probably go in the second round. We need a QB. You don't have to pitch that to me. I am a firm believer that Clemson needs a quarterback for next season. I still believe they're going to make a run at one. There's nothing that's changed my mind about that. Now I might end up being wrong, and Dabo decides he doesn't want to go that route. But I believe I believe they're going to at least make a run. I've said it plenty of times. You go 9-3 this year, 10-2, even if you just barely miss the playoff. You can, if you win 9 or 10 games, you can go into next season selling the fan base on the potential of Vizina. After a 7-5 year where you were out of the playoff discussion in week 3, I don't think you can do that. I think next year's a huge year for Dabo. I'm not saying he's getting fired or anything like that, but if you decide to ride with CV and he's nothing more than what we've seen already, you could easily be looking at another 7-5, 8-4 type season, 6-6 maybe. I've just not seen much out of CV that gives me a lot of confidence in believing he's the guy. I don't believe that the receivers on the team believe he's the guy. I don't believe that some of the other players on the team believe he's the guy. And that's got to factor into the equation. If you come back from New York and you say, hey, CV's our guy, we're riding with him next year, we're not taking a quarterback in the portal, that absolutely could have an impact on let's just use TJ Moore, for example. It could absolutely impact, his decision on whether he wants to come back or go somewhere else. So, I mean, it's not a black and white thing. I just think if Clemson wants to get back to competing for the ACC title next year, it's got to start with going and getting a quarterback and an experienced one, an established one, a proven one, not a guy like Aaron Nolan, who hadn't done jack squat at Ohio State, couldn't even beat out Luke Doty at South Carolina. Not a guy like DJ Lagway, who's thrown almost as many interceptions as he has touchdowns. I'm talking about an upperclassman guy who's played 2-3 years and has played at a fairly high level. Even if you got to go get one from a G5 school or FCS school, as long as he's proven that he can play at a high level, that's the kind of guy I think they need. Cross hasn't hired a DC. I don't think he has, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think if that was going to happen, it would have already been done. I did originally think it was going to happen, but after being up there all last week, I'm pretty confident that's not going to happen. Thoughts on Trevor Lawrence? I don't watch much pro football anymore, to be quite honest. I do know Trevor's killing it over the last 4 weeks. I think he's had like 14 touchdowns, no interceptions. Jacksonville's 11-4, first place in the AFC South, a game up on the Titans. You know, if he continues at this pace, they've got 2 games left, I think, against the Colts and then one against the Titans that could end up being for the division there. But if he continues at this pace over the next 2 games and they end up running the table, they've won 6 in a row now, and they end up going out on the regular season on an 8-game winning streak, he's got to at least be in the conversation for MVP, in my opinion. You know, and it's been a long time coming for him, man. It was starting to hear some people use the word bust associated with him, man, but just not had a lot of stability there since he's been at Jacksonville. Golly, how many head coaches has he been through now? 2 or 3. And the offensive line, you know, up until this year, I don't even know how much improved it is this year. Again, I don't watch a lot of it, but I know the offensive line play has been subpar for much of his tenure there. But yeah, he's smoking hot right now. Only people who expect Dabo to not be serious about the portal are the famously super negative complainers on forums. Yeah, I understand the skepticism because Dabo's not had to, you know, he's not dipped into the portal. You know, I'm of the opinion, just like a lot of other people were a year ago, that they didn't really need to dip into it heavily. You know, hindsight's 2020. You know, turns out they probably should have went fishing for a few more. But you know, if you look at what they brought in 26 and what's, you know, going out off this team, they don't have any choice. I mean, you can tell in some spots that the plan is to go through the portal. You lose your best defensive end in the 26 class. You don't make any effort to replace him with anybody, you know, of that caliber. You take a flyer on a developmental guy late in the cycle, which you would have added regardless whether you still had Dre Quinn or not. So while some people that don't really follow it heavily will probably assume that was the replacement for Quinn, it wasn't. They didn't really go after another because they're planning on going and getting one out of the portal, at least one. You see Blake Stewart, safety, decommit, end up at Georgia. They don't make an effort to go get another one because they're going to address that in the portal. You know, I expect them to take an offensive lineman, even though they signed 6. You got a lot of experience leaving off of that. You got 4 of those guys leaving that have played a lot of football for you, and you got a lot of young talent. But outside of Braden Jacobs, most of them haven't played a whole lot. So you're probably going to need one guy to bridge the gap there. They only took 1 linebacker in this class. You just saw 2 leave via the portal, or 2 are going to leave via the portal. They didn't take a running back. Already lost one of those. We'll see if they lose any more after this bowl game. They've had plans for a while to address a couple of these positions via the portal. Safety and defensive end being probably the ones highest on the board. You listened to Tom Allen talk the other day. It's pretty obvious that he's planning to address some needs on his defense through the portal. Or you can get trolled by Dabo, because I'm to the point now where I'm starting to think he's trolling people with some of these comments he makes about the portal. He knows when he's talking to the media the other day, he says, we're not going to sign players before the portal opens. Well, no, duh. Nobody can technically sign anybody before the portal opens, but he knows exactly what he's saying. I'm sitting there listening to that thing, man. I say he's got to be trolling, right? Because there's a lot of things you can do work-wise in the portal without actually striking a deal and officially signing somebody, man. And I know for a fact that some of that work's already begun. I like Clemson to get Rex Ryan. Of the changes that that we're kind of been talking about over the past few weeks, I don't think Tom Allen's going to be one. So I don't think they're going to be in the market for a defensive coordinator. I hear noise outside my house. I have no idea what that is. It's got to be my dog doing something. Is there a good quality experienced QB planning to hit the portal that Clemson could be? I can't give you any names yet, but there's already been a bunch that have hit the portal. There's going to be a bunch more over the next week, way more. That the number that's already hit's going to increase dramatically. But I'll just say the same thing I've said already, before tonight. I wouldn't look at the top named guys like the Hoover guy from Tennessee. TCU. There's comparison. He's got ties to. He was committed to Indiana while Tom Allen was the head coach there. Then he decommits and signs with TCU. That's when Garrett Riley was there. So there's a couple of ties to Clemson. So it's easy to say, hey, look at this guy. This guy's got a tie to Clemson. He could be a candidate. There was, golly, there's one, the DJ Lagway kid who Clemson pursued heavily, coming out of high school. That one, that's the easy, line to make to him. But I would be looking at the guys, don't look at the top tier guys that are going to be commanding the highest dollars. I would be looking at the tier below that. Maybe a guy from a G5 school, heck, maybe even an FCS guy. Just depends. But that would be kind of where I would focus my attention. And that could mean a Power 4 guy too. Don't get me wrong. I just don't think it's going to be one of these, $4, $5, $6 million quarterbacks. They don't have the money that a Texas Tech's going to be able to throw, at the kid from, I think the kid from Cincinnati's, maybe it's him that's already been kind of pegged to Texas. But I would look a tier below that. My thoughts on the college football playoff game so far. I didn't even watch any of Ole Miss and Tulane because I knew what was going to happen. Matter of fact, we'd already seen that game. Ole Miss blew their doors off then. They blew their doors off Saturday. I knew what was going to happen with Oregon and JMU. Heck, we got well into the third quarter. I think Oregon had only faced one third down the whole game. I know that JMU ended up having a backdoor cover, man, but that game was never in doubt. I'm not totally against the G5, G6 schools getting in. But, man, having two in as 20, 30-point underdogs, man, that's not good television. And make no mistake, that's what the college football playoffs is about. It's television and television ratings. And I wish I had the answers, but that Miami game and Texas A&M game, man, that thing was a train wreck. Especially, the first 3.5 quarters. I mean, if you're a fan of nothing but defense, that was the game for you. Didn't think A&M's quarterback played all that well for the most part. God, there were so many drops in that game. But man, I thought Miami's defense came to play. There was a little bit of trash talk by one of the A&M offensive linemen when he was asked about, Bain from Miami, and he said something to the effect, "We don't even have to worry about him," or something. So, I am. One second. Sorry, I had to check that text, but I am not a guy that generally pulls for Miami. I can't stand them. But just because of that, I kind of wanted to see Miami win that game, and plus I hate seeing the SEC win. Miami, I'm interested to see how they do against Ohio State next. But there's there's got to be a way to keep to, how can you say it? I don't know. There's got to be a better way, man. I'm all for giving the G5s opportunities when they earn them. I just don't know that these two teams earned them this year. I'd much rather have seen Notre Dame in there or BYU in there. I'm kind of an advocate for the G5 having their own playoff. But, the more you think about that, you probably have to have a complete break and the two be totally separate and maybe not even play games in the regular season anymore. But if you're going to let them in, I think they need to earn it. I'm not a big fan of the AQs when it comes to the group of 5 or group of 6 or whatever it is now. You're going to always have blowouts in playoff games, man, but you go in knowing those guys are getting blown out. Football is not basketball. I know they want to manufacture this Cinderella story, and it's just, I'm not saying it'll never happen, but man, it's, when it does, it will be of the extremely rare occurrence. It won't be anything like basketball. Am I going to pull for Samford? I will be following them just like with Virginia and Oklahoma. What do you think about the guys he hired? Good moves or bad? I hope they do amazing things. I'm a big John Gross fan, so yeah, I mean, I'll be keeping one eye on it. I think that's the kind of place where you go. Everybody gripes about all these support staffers at Clemson not having a lot of experience. And I don't make no mistake, I'm of the opinion that Clemson's support staff is bloated and probably needs to be trimmed down in some areas now that we're into this rev share era where schools are paying players directly. I just don't know that there's a need for a coaching staff of that side. If I'm not mistaken, there's only 2 schools that have larger coaching staffs than Clemson's. So I think some of that fat needs to be trimmed to begin with. But a lot of people gripe about, some of the guys on the lower end of the totem pole, on the support staff at Clemson not having much experience. And to me, I've never had a big problem with that. It's when you start putting those guys into, on-field assistant positions that starts raising a red flag, particularly if you do it with a few too many all at the same time. But when you're talking about a school like Samford, to me, that's these guys like Paul Tyson and Andrew Zhao, Brendan Thompson, even Drew Sweeney, they've all kind of cut their teeth on the support staff at Clemson so they can get an opportunity like this at a school like Samford. So, yeah, I mean, I don't have a big problem with the hires. From my, we never saw a lot of Paul Tyson. He, throughout his career, even before he got to Clemson, he didn't play much. For those of you that don't know that, that's Bear Bryant's grandson, so it's kind of in his blood, as he's in his bloodlines. But from my understanding, he is a very smart X's and O's guy, and he's got the makings to be a really good quarterback coach. So I'm kind of interested to see where that thing goes. But yeah, I mean that's Sanford's the type of place where these types of coaches with as little experience as they got go and get their starts. Heard they pushed the players off the floor before the alma mater could be sung. I can't say one way or the other whether that happened or not. We were a little tied up as soon as the buzzer went off. Vandervoort had tweeted out something yesterday about the photographers being put up in the suite with us, and one of the girls up there was a little rude to him. He's got a lot of equipment. Bart Boatwright is who shoots for us, and he's got a lot of equipment that he uses. So he was kind of making room for it, and he had moved slid a chair from one spot to another, and the girl comes over there and asks him if he's done rearranging their furniture yet, which I thought was a little unprofessional. And so Vandervoort had tweeted something out about it, and as soon as the buzzer goes off, man, there's this marketing director right there in Will's face, and I'm sitting beside Will, and she's telling him he's got to take that tweet down. So I didn't really get to see what happened at the end, but it would not shock me in any way to know that that's what happened, man. That was the least organized thing that I've been a part of, that I can remember anyways. And it wasn't just media. From my understanding, there was very little, if any, communication with the venue in Clemson throughout the week. The radio crew got there, and all they had for them was a table. Nowhere to plug up, no power, the internet there sucked. Matter of fact, I couldn't even get my laptop to connect to my hotspot yesterday in there for some reason. So Will ended up having to write the gamer because I was going to do it, and the Wi-Fi wouldn't work. So I don't know what they did about the radio broadcast. I mean, I'm sure they got it off without a hitch, but it was not. I do not have a lot of positive to say about that experience. Did the opt-outs make the trip with the team? There have been examples of guys opting out at Clemson and making the trip. We were at practice twice last week. None of the opt-outs were there. From my understanding, none of them are going with the team. I've seen some people saying Antonio opted out, but Antonio's hurt. Could he have played if absolutely necessary? Probably. But if you're already dealing with injury, no need and risk in making it worse. I'm not sure I'd call him an opt-out or not since he's hurt, but I didn't even see him there. From my understanding, those guys are gone already. South Florida QB announced he's headed to the portal. Probably, yeah. There's already some chatter of him to Auburn already. Yeah, I saw that today too, not long after that thing broke. So That's probably a pretty good guess. Yeah. Wallen's shot right now is Wallen's struggling, man. You could after that, I don't think he ever even attempted another shot after he overshot that one yesterday and it didn't hit anything. I don't remember him taking another shot after that. Maybe I'm just remembering it wrong, but yeah, they need him to hit some threes. He's kind of that stretch guy. That's what they got him for. They need him to be able to hit from deep, man. He's got to find a stroke. Hopefully this break, I think they got 10 days off before they open ACC play. Brownell said a couple of times, he said it after the South Carolina game, and then he said it again last night that, they had a lot going on the week of that South Carolina game, and he thought some of them were a little wore down, so maybe this break will help them a little bit, although they did just have a little bit of a break between South Carolina and Cincinnati, but they're going to have a big, long one now, 10 days, I think. But I don't know that as far as Dallas Thomas, I don't know. That's a good question. We just haven't seen a whole lot of him. Best case scenario is they find some way for Wallen to find his stroke. Was Dabo's success largely a product of Brent Venables? I see this all the time, how it was all BV and none of Dabo. I think Dabo's success has always hinged on who he puts around him. The guys that run the offense, the guys that run the defense. I think Venables and those defenses were a big part of it. But I don't think Clemson's success was just a product of Brent Venables, though. He didn't recruit Trevor Lawrence. He didn't recruit Deshaun Watson. He didn't recruit Newt Hopkins or Sammy Watkins or Mike Williams or none of those elite level pass catchers they had. He didn't recruit Travis Etienne. None of those offensive playmakers, man. Clemson's offense was elite there for a few years, man. I think Chad Morris deserves a lot of credit for kind of implementing the scheme, and I think Tony Elliott deserves a lot of credit for kind of when Chad left for kind of taking it over and kind of putting his own stamp on it, while at the same time keeping the foundation of what Morris put in place there. So I mean, I think it's a product of a lot of different guys. And I think it starts with Sweeney and, and who he chose to put around him. And, for the most part, he's pushed the right buttons in that regard, man. It does not look like he pushed the right one with Garrett Riley. I think Brandon Streeter probably gets a bad rap for how his 1 year went. He had a terrible quarterback. They were, still working with that same offense that was a little outdated and stale by that time. Would have loved to see what he could have done with a legit quarterback and healthy wide receivers. So I mean, I can't sit here and honestly say that Clemson's success was a product of Brent Venables only. How many on the Pinstripe depth chart or practice squad? There's some there's a handful of former walk-ons on the depth chart. I got it right here if I can find it right quick. Penn State didn't even put out. All they did was put out their starters. Somebody texted me yesterday telling me that they had read on one of the Penn State boards that their interim head coach was, that they're expecting a lot. They were expecting a lot more opt-outs than they've already had, and they're kind of thinking they might come still. before the bowl game, and their interim head coach is trying to negotiate with those guys. And, I guess the way he made it sound was, like negotiating with them from a money standpoint to get them to play a certain amount of snaps, even if it was only 15, 20, 30 or whatever. But yeah, Penn State, they only put out, 11 starters on offense, 11 starters on defense, and their special teams guys and no backups. On Clemson's side, you got Chapman Pendergrass listed as the backup center, even though we know Harris Sewell can play center, but he's got to start. So he's extremely shorthanded along that offensive line. You've got Parker Fulgham as the backup to TJ Moore. You have Clark Sanderson as one of the backups to Tyler Brown, along with Juju Preston. And let's see, on the defensive side, we got Marcus Dixon on the depth chart for the first time. He's not a former walk-on, but he's the converted tight end. And we've got Fletcher Cothran as the backup to Kobe McLeod there at will. And that is it. So, yeah, there's a small number of former walk-ons on that depth chart. The offensive line for the Pinstripe Bowl is going to be questionable. And one injury will make it a disaster. Oh, man, it's got, I hate the, you still have Tristan Lee and Blake Miller and Ryan Linthicum, but you got to start Dietrich Pennington or Ronan O'Connell at left guard. I imagine it's going to be Pennington. I wouldn't be shocked if O'Connell don't take over at some point. And then at the other guard spot, it's Harris Sewell. If for whatever reason Sewell was to get hurt, I imagine you could slide Pennington or O'Connell into that guard spot without having to go to who do they have as his backup there? Oh, it's Gavin Blanchard. But yeah, they are one injury away from being in a bad spot. And, Harris Sewell was such a decorated guy coming out of high school. He's very highly touted, a 4-star. And he's just not quite lived up to that potential quite yet. To me, that's one of the bigger questions for next year is who's your starting center? Is it because kind of Harris Sewell's kind of been the next guy in line? That does not, generate a ton of confidence with me if you're telling me Harris Sewell's your starting center next year. You got Gavin Blanchard, who they kind of see as the center of the future, but I don't think an underclassman has ever started at center during the Dabo era. And Blanchard would only be a redshirt freshman next year. Dabo not only has to recruit against the national media and their narratives, but he also has to weather all the local media's clickbait, ad-infested, cancerous propaganda as well. I can't speak for anybody else's website. I can tell you ours. When you click on one of our stories, a big big video ad comes up. But if you click on the X, that's all you got to do. We did a story the other day about Quentin Cypher, linebacker Quentin Cypher, leaving Clemson out of his Final Four, Final Five, or whatever it was, his list of finalists. I had been told back early in the season that Clemson had no shot at landing Cypher. So, I basically quit tracking him at that point. But when he puts out his list of 4 finalists and says, I'm going to come, he did it like a week before he committed. So we put out a story, Clemson not a finalist for, one of their top linebackers. And I get this comment under the story on a Facebook page telling me that recruits see this. And I'm like, so what? It's our job to report the news, man. If Clemson misses on a guy, it is absolutely the media's responsibility to report that. If Clemson goes 7-5 and it's hurting them with recruits, and we know that because recruits are telling us that, it is our responsibility to report it. It's not our responsibility to just be sunshine pumpers and report all the good stuff, man. You have to report the bad with the good. There ain't a damn bit of it cancerous propaganda. Not what we do anyway, especially not the recruiting stuff, because I do it. If you see recruiting stuff on our site, it's coming from me, and I don't even write about intel anymore, hardly. I just, when it comes to recruiting, I publish interviews and news, and that's about it. I'll leave the intel to this kind of stuff here, but I always get a tickle when the media gets blamed for Clemson's struggles on the recruiting trail, especially when they just went 7-5. After being ranked in the top 5 in the preseason, especially, when you're struggling to land running backs, you got an offensive coordinator that will not, commit to the running game, but it's the media's fault. You're not even in the top 100 in pass defense. Got a couple of defensive backs decommit, but it's the media's fault. I never get tired of hearing it. Clemson's biggest problems on the recruiting trail are going 7-5, not even, being out of the playoff discussion after 3 games, in a season in which you were predicted to be a national title contender. Let me guess, it was the narratives that caused Clemson to start 1-3. And then you got to add into the fact that Dabo has so far not shown a propensity to want to always pay high school guys fair market value, which is, if you're offering way less than the next guy, more often than not, you're not going to get that guy. He's going to go take the better deal. So before you start blaming the media for Clemson struggles on the recruiting trail, let's let them get some of the stuff in-house cleaned up first. Then you can start pointing the finger our way. There it is. The recruits see all this. You know what? Play better. Pay better. There is nothing a recruit is seeing here or reading that I write that they don't already know, and more. I'll give you an example of what's hurting Clemson on the recruiting trail. I don't think I've ever talked about this. 2025 4-star offense, and I'm not going to say his name, but there was an offensive lineman, a 4-star kid in the 2025 class who was extremely high on Clemson's board. They recruited him extremely hard. He had told them all along that he was looking at making a decision that March, which would have been last March or last spring. I can't remember the month. Last spring. That he wasn't going to carry it out past officials or anything. So you get to December, late November, December. He visits campus. I get him on the phone, and I'm asking him some NIL stuff. Nothing. I'm not asking him like what they're paying or anything. And he happens to tell me Clemson's the only school that has not broached the money subject with him. Out of the 35, 40 schools recruiting him, Clemson's the only one. Now, grant you, this was November or December, and he's making a commitment in the spring, which is 3, 4, 5 months away. And Clemson's not even broached the subject. I'm not saying they haven't given him an amount. They haven't even brought the conversation up. So, man, this is Some of these problems are of Clemson's own doing, certainly not ours. How did it feel watching Miami and Texas A&M? I described it as a train wreck I could not look away from. It ended up getting kind of at least dramatic there at the end. Yeah, I can't tell you what they're going to pay. I can't tell you what they're willing to pay. They paid more than 3 for the one they had this year. So I mean, you know, I'm sure they know that the price tag for quarterbacks is going to be a little higher this year. I think you could probably find a good one, plenty good enough in the 3 to 4 range. I don't think you have to pay 4, 5, 6, or more than 4, 5, 6. That's why I say I would kind of look at that tier below the top tiered ones. It sounds like it's headed that way. That Belichick and is going to hire Bobby Petrino to be his offensive coordinator there at North Carolina. You know, the jokes write themselves, and I'll let you guys take care of that, because if I start getting into that, I'm going to get myself in trouble here, because I've got a very dark, twisted sense of humor. They don't want to break the bank. Clemson should look at Andrew Brody at Alabama State. CV could possibly hit the portal. With Denson and Brody would be a good battle with Pierman on deck. If Clemson were to take a portal, a portal quarterback, I would absolutely expect CV to bolt. There would be no reason to stick around after that, because if you can't win it now, you're not going to win it a year from now, especially once Kareem Hughley gets to campus and Tate Reynolds has been there a year. But yeah, that's what I mean when I say I would look a tier below those big name, high price guys like Hoover and Sorsby and those kind of quarterbacks. A top Ivy League QB could be a good fit. Possibly. I fully expect Venables to go into coaching. Absolutely. It's 100% what he should do. I was talking about it being in Paul Tyson's bloodline earlier. Man, it's totally running through his veins. We need help with numerous positions. Do I have any suggestions? Yeah, hit the portal. That's what it's there for. That would be my suggestion. My only suggestion. I think you got to address quarterback. I think you got to address offensive line. I think you got to address defensive end. I think you got to address safety. I think you need a corner. You might need a linebacker. I think there are more positions than not that need to be shored up. Hayden Step, one of the top corners in the class, just put out his 4 or 5 finalists yesterday, late last night. Clemson was one of them. He visited for the SMU game, picked up his offer right after that. Still a long ways to go with him, man, but it's encouraging that Clemson's at least in the final group. They couldn't make it that far with Cypher. Mike Reed's been a big part of he's been a big part of the corners at Clemson for the past decade plus, more than 10 years now. I have yet to talk to a cornerback. And just because a guy says, I would love to play for Coach Reed, that doesn't mean he's going to come. There might be somebody else he would rather play for. He feels like he fits best. I have yet to find a recruit with even remotely a negative thing to say about Mike Reed. The guy's track record speaks for itself, multiple first-round draft picks. And I don't think it's a given that he's going to be back next year. And if he's not, then I think that totally changes the complexion with these corners that you're recruiting in 27 currently. And I think it could potentially change the complexion with Stepp. I certainly wouldn't call Clemson a favorite at this point, but let's see if they can get him to campus in early March for the elite retreat, March 7th, that weekend. You try to get him there for that big thing and, take it from there. Coordinators and position coaches are properly compensated. I don't see why a bloated staff is such a big deal, and salaries are very competitive. Yeah, the salaries are competitive. To me, the only thing about it is I think there's probably some unnecessary expense there. I just think, and in this era where colleges are now, paying players directly, they're all looking for ways to kind of save some money, and this would be a way to do that. I think it was fine, during the previous era before players started getting paid, but I just think Clemson's support staff is a little it's probably too big. There's only so much to do, so much work to go around. I just think there's probably some positions that could be cut and you wouldn't miss a beat. But that's just me, and to me, it's more of a revenue thing than anything. Don't you think schools that take developed players in the portal should pay the university that developed the player an amount of money too? No. I don't. I am all for getting, better contracts in place and trying to create a little bit more stability to where you don't have, year to year free agency. It's probably going to take some type of collective bargaining, and I don't even know how that looks when you're talking about college, because these guys are only around 3, 4, 5 years. It's not like professional sports where, players play for 10, 15, sometimes 20 years. So it'll be a little bit different. But nah, man, if a kid wants to leave Clemson, let's look at Shelton Lewis. And I'm just using him as an example because he's going to fit the narrative I'm going to push here. I would have thought Shelton Lewis was going to be your starting nickel coming into the season. Well, he gets beat out by Tink Kelly. Doesn't hardly play at all those first few games. The writing's on the wall. He says, hey, coach, man, I want a red shirt, save this year of eligibility, and transfer somewhere I can play next year. I don't think that school where he ends up owes Clemson anything. I wouldn't have a big problem if there was some kind of language in these deals to where the kids had to pay some type of buyout back to the school if they don't live up to the contract. Nothing like what we're seeing. Who was it? Georgia trying to, get out of that kid. I don't know if y'all saw that news or not. I think Georgia sued a kid for like $390,000, even though they never paid him the money. He left shortly after signing his NIL deal. I think he got paid 1 month maybe, and then he hit the portal. And Georgia's trying to sue him for the entire deal, which was $390,000. That makes no sense to me. But yeah, maybe if there's a buyout on the players' end, like there are for coaches, maybe you can curb a little bit of some of this movement. I don't know if that would even help, but I mean, I wouldn't see a big problem with that. Not right off the top of my head, anyways. I mean, if I thought about it deeper, maybe I would. But as far as one school owing another school money because the kid transfers there, no, I'm not in favor of that. Clemson seems to be just developing high school kids to fill SEC and Big Ten rosters. Yeah, I don't know about that, man. Clemson's not really lost many starters to the portal. I mean, there's been a few, but a small number. Most of the guys that leave are guys that aren't playing, and their future playing time looks rather bleak. And there's been a couple that have gotten a little impatient and left, and maybe they could have played later on. But, for the most part, the guys that have bolted, they weren't starters, and they weren't looking to be starters the following year at Clemson. So I don't know that I don't know about that, man. I mean, I would say Makuba is probably the biggest one when he transferred to Texas, but I get it that some of the things he said in the media caught a lot of people's attention, but there were some things behind the scenes that factored into that people don't even know about. And he was hurt up a lot of his second year at Clemson, and they were trying to play him some at corner because they were shorthanded there, and I don't think he was happy about that. But, there were a lot of other things factored into that didn't have nothing to do with football. I think of some of these receivers that left Clemson over the years, and they not really going on to do much of anything. Frank Ladson, E.J. Williams, Dakari Collins. I don't even think Bo Collins did a whole lot his year at Notre Dame. He was kind of so-so. Golly, I'm probably missing somebody, but there just hadn't been a whole lot of starters that have left. If the last OCs didn't work, why the third time be the charm? Well, I think Chad Morris worked out well. I think Tony Elliott worked out fantastic. Like I said earlier, I think it's unfair to say Brandon Streeter didn't work out. I think, if you want to strip it down to the bone, I think Garrett Riley's been the only miss. I think what Dabo probably should have done when Elliott left was go out and hire somebody like Riley to kind of come in and revamp the offense. Instead, he promoted somebody within to run the same thing with a terrible quarterback. I don't think much of that had anything to do with Brandon Streeter. But to answer your question, I mean, the way you've got this thing written out, you make it sound like you should stick with a bad hire just because you don't know how the next one's going to work out. I don't know. I don't know how you want me to answer that. I mean, it's not working. You got to do something different. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. If football X count posted on departure from the facility to board the bus, Woodaz was going, so I assume Antonio is going to. I don't. Woodaz was at practice all last week. I didn't see Antonio. I don't know that he's going or not. Do you feel if Tony Elliott keeps the ball rolling at UVA, he would be a hot name for a big coaching job. If he wins 10 games there again next year, yeah, he'll probably be able to pivot that into a bigger job. Sure. It's got to go out and win 10 again first. Ronan O'Connell is going to be there's several of those underclassmen offensive linemen that I'm really high on. O'Connell, I think Gavin Blanchard's going to be really good. I think, obviously we've seen Braden Jacobs. I think Easton Ware's got a bright future. I would say, I would even say, don't count out Mason Wade. There's a handful of those young guys already there that I think can, develop into guys that play a lot. Now we'll see if they can hold off some of these studs that Luke just signed in this 26 class. 6 of them, all of them are 4 stars except one. Braden Wilmus, who was a 4-star at one time, not sure why he got dinged down. But I mean, even golly, these are big, fast, athletic guys. Wilmus is 6'8". Needs to add some weight, but he's 6'8". Still hate that we missed on BPW. There was no way Clemson could not afford to pay him what A&M was offering. It just wasn't doable. Just wasn't doable. Any chance we go after Josh Hoover? I can't say they won't. I don't like their chances of landing him. Again, he's got some ties to Tom Allen. He's got some ties to Garrett Riley. So, I mean, we'll see what happens. I just think he's going to be one of the higher demand guys, and I kind of look for Clemson to, if indeed they do go after one, I think it'll be, one of the quarterbacks in the tier below Hoover and Sorsby and those kind of guys. If Lagway didn't commit to you when you recruited him, why go after him now? Let's pump the brakes on that one. While I absolutely agree Lagway should not be the target, but not because he didn't commit to you the first time. It's easy. Let's say Lagway had gone to Florida and, he killed it this year instead of stinking up the joint. And let's not forget he was hurt for pretty much missed the whole off season, which set him back some. So let's make sure to add that in there. But let's just say that he had a solid year and didn't throw as many interceptions as he did touchdowns. And he decided to go into the portal. And, he calls one of the coaches at Clemson and says, "Hey, I'm going in the portal. Do y'all still have any interest in me?" It could always be a case of, "Hey, man, I thought Florida was the best fit for me. I've been there 2 years. Turns out I was wrong. I made a mistake. I should have went with y'all all along." When you start framing it that way, it sounds a little bit different. Although, again, I don't think that Lagway is what Clemson needs at this point. But just because you missed on a guy out of high school, I don't think that should stop you from pursuing him in the portal if he fits the needs you have. Because if he was a fit for the culture then, chances are he's still a fit for it now. Give us your dark sense of, yeah, nah. Nah, I don't want to get in trouble with number one. the people I work for. I don't want to get in trouble with anybody. Just know what you see here is a very toned down version. I have a very, very dark. It sometimes it drives my wife crazy because her sense of humor is the exact opposite of mine. It's very dry, and she likes that dry stuff like the movie Elf. I'm not a big fan. My sense of humor is much darker and twisted and sometimes dirty. Say it. But best to keep those kind of things to yourself. When will portal guys start visiting? January 2nd when it opens. I can't remember. Let's see. Hold on a minute. Let's see here. I can tell you what the calendar is right now. I usually have that pulled up, but I don't. I think they can. The contact period runs from January 5th to January 31st. And there is a quiet period in place from January 1st to January 4th. And visits are allowed and during those times. So they can start as soon as January 1st. Why is Dabo so hesitant on paying top high school players top dollars? It's crazy. I think there's a fine line there. I firmly believe that they're going to start having to offer, more money to some of these high school guys. But going back to who we were talking about a minute ago, like with Bryce Perry Wright, there's no way that you can pay him if you're Clemson what A&M's paying him. You just can't. It's not doable. They can't afford it. So when you start talking when you're recruiting against schools like that, and the gap's that substantial because this one was, there's just not a whole lot you can do about it. Not in this current era, anyways. But on the surface, yeah, I'm with you. They gotta, start. There's nothing wrong with telling a high school player, hey man, we're gonna pay you, but we're gonna pay you this. If you want to start making more money, you got to come earn it. That's good. That's all well and dandy, in theory, but that's not how this thing works anymore. You at least gotta have competitive offers, and I think Clemson's done a little bit better job with that in this current class. But when you start, talking about some of these other schools and that they're offering a kid, let's just say, for example, you look at the offensive lineman, the 5-star offensive line. I think he got $4 million from Texas Tech, maybe, if I'm remembering right. Clemson can't pay that, man. They can't do it. You kind of are where you are in that regard. How hard is it to fire a coach like CJ when his name? You can't fire CJ Spiller. He's a Hall of Famer. Now, if you decide that's an area you want to, go in a different direction, that doesn't mean you can't put CJ in another job. Shelton Lewis should have started over Tink. Bad evaluate. Shelton was hurt. I don't know that he ever got back to being healthy. Elf is an elite Christmas movie. You sir sit on a throne of lies. I thought that might not be met with the best reception. I have not seen Landman, but I am a big Billy Bob Thornton fan. Yeah, I talked about this at the top about the coaches being in place by the time the portal opens. That's going to be damn near impossible, at least at some spots, especially if you're making a move at coordinator. Unless, and I find it hard to believe it's already been done and not have leaked out. The only way you could probably do that at a coordinator spot is if you already had the next guy. He's already agreed to it and it's done. Maybe not officially signed, but everything's agreed to verbally. That's about the only way it gets done before the portal opens. And to me, I don't think it absolutely kills you in the portal, but it certainly, it doesn't. If you're recruiting a quarterback, a lot of them are going to want to know who their quarterback coach is. You can tell them the scheme all day long and what you're going to run, but that I understand the $3.5 million buyout, and you definitely don't want to be on the hook for that, and affording a guy an opportunity to go find another job. But at some point, man, if you know you're going to make a move and you're kind of waiting out to the bowl game, you're putting yourself behind the eight ball a little bit for sure. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't think it kills you or anything, man. It just makes it a little harder, at least for some guys. Is there any thought from the NCAA on players' salary caps? No. They can't do that. Outside, you got the House settlement, the 20.5 rev share cap, which was agreed to in a lawsuit by both sides. But the NCAA can't put a cap on NIL. That's been that goes back to a Supreme Court ruling. When NIL first, was coming on board, the NCAA worked on legislation for NIL for like 2 years. And then they basically got slapped down by the Supreme Court. It was a majority vote, 9-0, regarding this stuff. And they just said, we're going to wash our hands of it and we'll let the conferences do it. But there's not a whole lot you can do right now. And until, and a lot of people think that putting a commissioner in place would fix some things. And I don't even know if that would. Not until you get all these conference commissioners like Greg Sankey and Jim Phillips and, Tony, what's his name, from the Big Ten, all those conference commissioners, they're only worried about their conference. Nobody's worried about the sport. And I got a buddy who's a big Gamecock fan, and me and him have talked about this a lot. Until somebody starts caring about the sport, this is what you've got. And I don't think what you got is sustainable at a certain point. It's the bubble's going to pop. Because if with this rev share stuff, all that's fine. That money's coming from the schools, but this NIL comes from a different pot of money. It comes from your big donors. And you think about Clemson, man, they don't have a big wealthy donor like Michigan does or Texas Tech does. You heard Arizona State's head coach last week, saying they needed a guy, that could cut a $20 million check. He's kind of referring to schools that have that guy. You got some big donors at Miami and Oregon, and Clemson's got a very small alumni base. Man, they don't put out doctors, and they don't have a law school or medical school, so they don't put out doctors and lawyers, and they just don't have that generational wealth. But that's where the NIL money comes from. So if you got a guy that says, "Hey, man, I'll give you $10 million to put, to help put together a team," that'll be on top of the $20.5 million that you're getting from the house settlement. That's $30 million. Clemson had, around 20, more than 20, probably less than 25 million invested in their roster on this team right now. You got some other teams that have got 30, 35, I think some maybe even up to 40. That's a big difference. And until some of these conference commissioners can get on the same page, and I don't think they ever will, because again, their job is to worry about their conference and what's best for them. But at a certain point, I think the bubble's going to burst because the guys cutting those checks, man, there's no return on that investment. It's not even a tax write-off anymore. So it's basically just money you're giving away to a football player. Again, like I said earlier, man, I think the only fix is collective bargaining and player unions. And I don't even know how you get there, because it's not like the NFL. You only got players staying for 3, 4, 5 years. They're not professionals, that stay around for a decade plus. So it's just going to be interesting to see how it goes. I kind of foresee it playing out like this. Like I've said before, I think, in the next 10 years, you're going to have 40, 50, 60 schools all break off from the NCAA and go do their own thing. I think they'll all be getting paid out of the same pot. They'll have one massive TV deal, similar to the NFL, and they'll set it up similar to the NFL, kind of like the AFC and the NFC, and break them off into divisions. That's kind of how I foresee it playing out. And at that point, if you got a union in place and you're collectively bargaining, you can agree on a salary cap. So that's kind of where I see it going, but I don't think we're quite there yet. I think we're probably another decade off. We'll see, these current television deals expire 2030, 2031. I don't know that I see this happening that quickly. Maybe after the next set of television deals. But, it's kind of the way, Dabo's actually said it many times. He always says 40 teams. That's the number he always throws out there. But, whether it's 40, 50, or 60 or whatever it is, same concept. Will Clemson ever be able to compete if they can't pay enough? It's a good question, man. Now I'm of the opinion that that Clemson did not handle this NIL stuff very well. It wasn't well organized. They didn't really push the importance of it until it was a little too late. They really didn't start pushing it hard until 18 months ago, when they knew the house settlement was getting close to being finalized. Heck, it might not even been that long ago. There's never been much of a ground roots effort to kind of, or not a coordinated one anyways, to kind of hit the entire fan base. It's always kind of been focused on the IPTE members, and I don't think, the people that ran IPTE and the people that ran the collective always saw eye to eye on how to do things. I just think it was a giant mess, man. But I do think there's a way that Clemson can compete, but I mean, it's certainly not a guarantee. You got to be better. Clemson, they did away with their collective because of the house settlement. They kind of folded it into Clemson pitchers, and they're wanting all their NIL deals to be, like legal third-party deals. And, other schools are not abiding by those rules. And as long as Clemson is dead set on doing some of this stuff the right way and by the rules, they're at a disadvantage. That's just there's no other way to dress it up. If they'll start working in the gray areas a little bit more than they do now, and start putting some, again, ground roots, NIL collection campaigns together, if you will. I think it can help, but when you got a school like Texas Tech that's got this billionaire donor, man, that'll basically stroke a check when you ask him, it's hard to compete with that if you're a Clemson or a South Carolina or a school of that nature, particularly Clemson with their much smaller alumni base. But if it's coordinated enough, man, I do think they can be competitive. Are they going to be a perennial national title contender, year after year after year? I don't think so. But I do think, they can be at a place where they're competing for a national title here and there, and they can compete for a spot in the playoff more often than not. It'll take a lot of work, and it'll take a willingness to operate in some gray areas, which they've not shown to do to this point. We're not shown willing to do to this point, but I do think it's doable. What's the chances Riley stays? Like I said at the top, man, I just don't know how you can bring him back at this point. I think if you somehow now decide that you're going to bring him back, and a lot of this is going to depend on, who Dabo can get to replace him. If you can't get somebody you're satisfied with as a replacement, then I don't know that you make that move. But if he were somehow to come back at this point, man, I even though he's got 2 years left on his deal, man, he's going to be viewed as a lame duck coordinator. Just due to all the talk surrounding him over the back half of the season, and since the regular season's ended, it can't do anything to help you when you're recruiting. Fortunately for Clemson, they've got a quarterback committed in 27, and Kareem Hughley, who's doesn't, in talking to him, he doesn't sound like he's married to Garrett Riley. To him, it's more about going to Clemson and playing for Dabo. And it sounds like that with several offensive guys from the 26 class and the couple they've gotten 27 so far. But I don't, with the way this season's played out, man, I've never seen Dabo throw a coach under the bus the way he did Garrett Riley this year, and as many times as he did Garrett Riley this year. Just kind of threw him to the wolves. Not saying that Riley didn't earn the criticism. He did. But Dabo doesn't generally, get very critical of his coordinators in public. He did it a little bit with West last year, and that's kind of, that was the writing was kind of on the wall. That's why that's when people really started to think that there was going to be a change made there, because the way Dabo was talking about him sometimes. But I just don't. I don't know how strong that relationship is at this point. I just don't know that it ends well if you decide to bring him back. It's already not going to end well if you move on from him now. But I just don't know, man. And if you're Dabo, next year's a huge year for you. Not saying that I think you'd get fired or anything like that if you went 7-5 again, but if you go 7-5 again, or 6-6, or maybe even 8-4, with Garrett Riley still as a coordinator, I think it makes it that much harder to go out and get a top level coordinator to replace him a year from now. I think if you're going to make that move, you got to make it. And if you don't, man, it could, I don't know. I think it could end up being disastrous. All right, last one. Whoever the next OC, hopefully whoever the next OC is, they use the tight ends like we used to, because there was plenty times this year using the tight. Yeah, the tight ends are not the focal point that they were in the old offense. That's for sure. I'd like to see them used a little bit more in the red zone. I think tight ends had 3 touchdown catches all year long. But I think that's kind of a product of I don't know, man, just having a lot of West Coast tendencies. But, yeah, you got some tight ends that are capable of making a difference in the passing game, man. They probably need some more opportunities, especially once you get closer to the end zone. All right, this is the last one. Just hope not knowing who coach is going to be may make Clemson wide receivers transfer out. I know for a fact, and, this can be disputed, but I know this for a fact, that there was at the minimum a player or two who pretty much said that if Riley was back, they would not be. Now, does that mean their mind can't be changed, or has it been changed? Absolutely. That certainly could happen. You never know how those things play out, but I do know that I do know that to be fact. And I will leave it at that. Golly, I'm going way over tonight. I appreciate everybody that's tuned in tonight. Hate Brandon getting jump on, man. He's back at work. Sometimes he works late during the week, and he's not always available on Monday nights. But we do thank our sponsor over at A-Glass. 2 locations in the PD. 1 in Florence, if you need the info. 1 in Sumter. Take care of all your auto glass needs. They do replacement. They do repair. Been in business a long time around here, man. Sorry, I got distracted. They've been in business a long time around here, man, decades. And there's a reason why they've been around as long as they've had, because they are some of the best at what they do. A-Glass, for when you need a glass. Get yourself a free quote today. myaglass.com. Right back here next Monday. Heck, we didn't even really talk about Penn State and the Pinstripe Bowl tonight, which I kind of thought might be the case. But by the time we reconvene a week from now, that game will have been played, and there might be a lot more to talk about then. Either way, check us out, ClemsonInsider.com, right back here next Monday, 7 p.m. All kind of malfunctions here tonight. Next Monday, 7 p.m.